Could you comment briefly on the different positions between the groups that defend capitalism, such as the libertarians, and also some Austrian economists that quite disagree with Ayn Rand? The thing that comes to my mind is intellectual property rights.
Yeah. So other defenders of capitalism, what's their perspective? So I'll start with conservatives because they're easy. Right? Conservatives believe that capitalism is fundamentally immoral, that it fundamentally encourages and supports behavior that's immoral, but they say that's life, so be it. We still want capitalism because it produces wealth and produces the goods. Libertarians don't want to talk about morality. It's not comfortable. They're not into it. You can have any morality you want. We just believe, as long as you believe in capitalism, which they don't define very clearly, it's okay. So that is so they give up. They basically fold on any kind of philosophical discussion about the foundations of what capitalism should be based on. And you ask the Cato Institute or any of the, von Mises Institute or any of these pro-capitalist institutes, economic, social system capitalism, what they believe should be the moral basis for capitalism, whatever you want, they say. They don't care. It's, they don't do it. They don't do morality explicitly. Huge mistake. It's why I think they're losing. It's all about the morality. It's all about ethics. Look, there is a big debate about intellectual property rights. Many of the libertarian movement don't believe there should be intellectual property rights. I think that's a huge mistake. I think fundamentally all property is intellectual property. That's one of the real essential features of what Ayn Rand talked about. It's all reason. Even manual labor cannot be done effectively without the use of the human mind, in a sense, intellectual. All property rights are fundamentally intellectual property rights. Now, if you're really interested in this, there's a scholar at, again, George Mason University in the law school by the name of Adam Ossoff, who's done some fantastic work on intellectual property rights. He's devoted his career to that, and on kind of countering the libertarian position on that. I did say it was the last 4 questions, so I'm sorry. So I encourage you to go and look at Adam's work on this issue. But yeah, that's one difference. The other difference is the von Mises Institute libertarians tend to be anarchists. And again, I gave my position on anarchy a few minutes ago. I think anarchy is immoral. I think it's wrong. I think it's impractical. I think the moral is the practical. And I'm a strong believer in government, as I said, that does one thing and one thing only.
So I'd like to preface my question with just 2 things, which is one, as a high schooler, I read all of Ayn Rand's books and was incredibly captivated. So I studied economics, and then I started rethinking a few things. And so I wanted to challenge this idea of property rights, which you just bring up.
Sure.
Which is, especially in Ayn Rand's philosophy, there's this idea that property rights are almost, it's the same as the individual. It exists by itself in a vacuum. Like, you have this God-given right to your property. And my challenge to that is property does not exist without a commons, because by owning property, you actually there is a debt to the commons, because the commons have to protect that property. For me to own property and for it to be my property, I have to ensure that someone's going to look out and make sure that it stays my property, right? And as a result, there is a debt to that common. So as a result, we can then ethically say that, yes, one does need to pay a tax on this property to the commons to ensure that that property is protected. And going along that same tangent, I think we can say that a lot about so many things, that for capitalism, for these markets to work, first and foremost, we need to have a healthy commons, right? We need to be able to mitigate risk across so many things that we can say that, well, it's unacceptable for people to take on this risk, like the risk of protection of themselves, personal protection, or taking the risk of their life and their health. And rather, by mitigating that risk, then you can allow people to, unleash their entrepreneurial spirits or their creative spirits in order to kind of create, this kind of utopian ideal that we really speak about, or that Ayn Rand speaks a lot about. And I wanted your thoughts on that, because that goes very counter to the philosophy. It's very paradoxical, but I think it's very true that we as a society need to say, well, what is this basic commons where we can, again, where it makes sense for us to pitch in and mitigate risk So because humans are awful at actually assessing it.
I get it.
So we can.
I get it. I mean, I think I got the first half. I'm not sure I got the second half because
All right.
you made a huge logical leap to mitigating risk, which is.
Well,
I get
okay.
that. I think property doesn't come from God. I mean, Ayn Rand, I think, would recognize that, right? If you read Ayn Rand, you'd know that. But property comes from your intellectual labor, from the fact that you created what you created. And yes, it needs to be protected. It needs to be defined. There needs to be a mechanism by which we define the property and protect the property. And I certainly can buy guns, and I can protect it myself to some extent. But that's not a productive, and it's not a good way in which to structure this mechanism of protecting property. And that's why we have government. We have government in order to define, help us define. We have a place where we register the limits of our property and where government can step in and protect us from thieves and crooks who want to come onto that property and steal it and take it away. And I acknowledge that we need government. I don't call it a commons. I think that's ridiculous because government is not the commons. It's government. There's a concept there. Commons is an economic term for the park outside that nobody owns. I mean, yeah, I mean, economists like broadening concept to the point where they mean nothing. But in this case, commons means something, and it doesn't mean government. Government is not a commons. Government is government. And government needs to exist in order to do some of what you said it should do. Arbitrate disputes, help protect property. And that's it. Now, if I get sick, the commons don't do anything. I mean, again, if I get sick, I have two options. I can ask my neighbor for help, or I can steal the money from him. That's it. Those are the only two options I have. The commons don't give me anything. The only way the commons can get anything to give me is by stealing it from other people. And that's wrong. We've eradicated theft from society, hopefully. That's the whole idea.
So I would like to challenge the fact that's wrong, because what I'm trying to say is...
If you think that theft is right, then it's hard to have a discussion. I believe...
I think theft is wrong. I think theft is wrong. However, to the point of healthcare,
what's that?
We say that, okay, people have a right to health. People have...
No, but they don't have a right to health.
We want to say that people are
that's
healthy.
That's a perversion of the concept.
And so the question becomes that, well, are there certain things that the government is then best left to distribute, and certain things that people have the ability, have the cognition to be able to actually make those decisions themselves?
No, I mean, the whole concept of right cannot be used in the context of right to health. You cannot have a right to somebody else's labor. Somebody produces... because what that provides you, a right to health, is basically bringing back slavery. Because it means that somebody else has to provide you with what you need, whether they want to or not. They are your serf. In this case, doctors and nurses are your serfs. If you have a right to health care, doctors and nurses are your serfs. I don't believe in slavery. I don't believe in serfdom. There's no such thing. You have a right to pursue health. You have a right to make money and try to buy health products. That's the right you have. But that's it. That you extrapolate from the need for government to protect my property, where it is retaliating against somebody else using force against me, to a government that's using force against doctors and nurses in order to provide somebody who has more political pull than the nurses and doctors. That's not extrapolation. That is not legitimate. Logically, it's not legitimate. It's a huge logical leap. And it's a misuse, indeed a complete distortion of the concept, the historical concept of rights. And I think it's immoral and wrong. And we have to resurrect the concept of rights as understood properly by John Locke and the founders. And we have to, defend what government should properly do and should not properly do, based on that concept, based on the concept of right. But I'm going to take the question behind you, and that'll be it.
Well, I appreciate your thoughts.
Sure.
Thank you again for coming out here. It's so nice to hear lucidity and reason about the situation that we're in. My question is about crime, I suppose. Obviously, the role of the government, as I believe you had said, is to protect us from those that would do us harm, internally and externally. The debate I get into and the question I ask myself was, where is that line between, obviously, you don't want to protect people from themselves. That's a violation of their rights. But where is the line? And the things that come to mind for me are like drugs, certain drugs, drunk driving, things like that, where that person may be exercising their right, but is it a logical extension that taken too far, they'll rob me to support a habit? That's just one example. I was hoping you could help me with
I have a chocolate habit. I mean,
but
there's
chocolate doesn't have the same physical dependency as certain illicit drugs.
Maybe. You don't know my chocolate habit. No, I'm kidding. Look, the point is this. If your behavior clearly puts people at risk, so for example, drunk driving is a good example. If you're out driving drunk, you're putting people at risk. No matter how you spin it, no matter how you look at it, you're violating other people's rights. Whether you hit the other car or not, it's going to happen because we know what happens when you're drunk. Now, should we prohibit drinking? No. Should we prohibit drunk driving? Yes. And by the way, if the roads were private, that would be easy because it would be a contractual issue, right? You're not going to drive drunk on my road. If I want to have one big asphalt thing for drunk drivers, that would be okay.
Right? It's a bumper cars.
So private property solves a lot of these problems, and having the commons is a problem because how do you regulate the commons? But no, I believe that individual behavior, if it doesn't necessarily mean using force on other people or threatening other people directly, should be left to your discretion.
So it's that necessity.
Yeah. So for example, drunk driving, we get an example. You shouldn't be allowed to own a tank. A tank. Why? Because there's only one function for a tank. If it's functioning, right? If all its mechanisms would be pulled apart, I don't care. But a fully functioning tank, and there's only one purpose, and that is to blow things up. I don't want to. It is a real threat. It is a real threat to other people to have a tank next door.
Does that extend to handguns and weapons?
No, and where the line is a question mark. I don't have exact line, but there is a difference between a tank and a handgun for self-defense. There's a difference between a tank and a shotgun. There are differences. That's why I chose a tank and not an AK-47 because that's clearly borderline. But yeah, I mean there are things that are clearly only meant. Driving drunk is only meant to hurt somebody. I mean, if you're really drunk. And the same thing with the tank. So there are lines. The court system will have to define what those lines are. But the issue is it really a threat? Not potentially, maybe, if they ever do it, a threat. But their behavior, is it a threat to other people? And if it is, it should be banned. If it's not, then if you're killing yourself, that's your problem, nobody else's.
Thank you.
And indeed, we could talk about prohibitions and how many people die from prohibitions. And you will discover that many, many more people die from the prohibition itself than do when there's no prohibition. Just use alcohol as a great example. More people die during the shoot-em-ups and the existence of the mafia, the very creation of the mafia around prohibition, than do from the fact that people are allowed to drink.
One parting thought, and forgive me, but somebody described the democracy you were talking about before as two wolves and a sheep trying to vote on dinner.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. No, that's easy. Yes. Thank you all.